Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping right into what honestly feels like a corporate thriller ripped straight out of a Hollywood script. We're talking about the Silicon Isle, Ireland's economic master plan. We're going to explore a strategy involving visionary civil servants, aggressive corporate hunting, and, well, some of the absolute most complex financial architecture the modern world has ever seen.
So how exactly did an agricultural island become the world's most lucrative tech haven? Think about it. For decades, we were looking at a tiny, peripheral agricultural economy, high immigration, low living standards, and heavily relied on the UK market. Yet somehow, this small country completely transformed itself into the undisputed tech capital of Europe, a massive global powerhouse for life sciences, and the home base for Silicon Valley's absolute biggest players. How on earth did they pull that off? Well, get a load of this number. 34.4%. Back in 2015, Ireland's GDP experienced this staggering, entirely artificial spike of 34.4%. It was a statistical distortion so massive that it literally shocked global economists. It forced the Irish Central Statistics Office to temporarily redact their own data and set off massive alarm bells over in the EU. But here's the thing, this unbelievable number wasn't some clerical error. It was the culmination of a strategy decades in the making.
Act 1. The Blueprint. To truly wrap our heads around how we got to that wild statistical anomaly, we have to travel back to the rather bleak 1950s to look at the foundational blueprint of modern Ireland.
Back in 1955, at just 39 years old, a highly visionary civil servant named T.K. Whitaker was appointed Secretary of Finance. By 1958, he essentially killed off Ireland's old protectionist policies with a watershed study called economic development. This opened up trade and actively courted foreign capital. And that paved the way for another massive shift. In 1966, a totally unorthodox government minister, Donogh O'Malley, dropped an absolute bombshell. Without even consulting the Department of Finance, mind you, he just announced free secondary education for all children up to 18, which officially kicked off in 1967.
As the historical records highlight, education was no longer the preserve of the privileged and the moneyed classes. This singular, highly political move democratized learning literally overnight. By stripping away the financial barriers for rural and low-income families, Ireland unintentionally but brilliantly built up the exact highly educated modern workforce that global tech giants would soon be begging for.
Act 2. The Hunt. Armed with this newly educated young population, the state was ready to go on the absolute offensive. Enter IDA Ireland, an agency tasked with aggressively hunting down foreign direct investment.
IDA Ireland's Team Ireland approach meant they didn't just sit around waiting for the phone to ring. No, they actively abandoned domestic protectionism and went out to court the major players. They pitched Ireland as the ultimate English-speaking gateway to European markets, threw in heavily subsidized grant assistance, and created incredibly favorable corporate tax environments. They basically treated corporate investors like absolute royalty. The IDA was out there selling a really bold vision. They were pitching the idea of taking quiet, rural agricultural landscapes and transforming them into massive, cutting-edge construction projects and engineering hubs. They were essentially convincing the world's most advanced companies to take a massive bet on Irish soil. And in 1989, that vision paid off in a completely historic way to the tune of £87 million. The IDA negotiated this massive grant package to convince Intel to set up their European manufacturing operations in Leaslip, County Kildare. It was a huge gamble for both sides. But man, did that gamble become the turning point. Intel's Leixlip campus became the foundation of a €30 billion global technology hub. Intel's arrival truly validated Ireland on the global stage. What started as that daring 1989 investment has ballooned into a mega investment. And having that concrete, high-tech manufacturing base proved absolutely crucial when the country eventually had to rebuild from the devastating Celtic Tiger economic crash years later.
Act 3. Rise of the Silicon Docks. As the 21st century dawned, the focus started shifting from hardware manufacturing out in the countryside to software and the internet right in the heart of Dublin.
You can actually see this dramatic urban transformation unfold in a few clear steps. First, establish the Dublin Docklands Development Authority in 1997 to regenerate a totally depressed maritime wasteland. Second, attract Google in 2003. They started with literally just 5 employees. And third, sit back and watch Facebook, Amazon, and Twitter follow suit. Once Google was in, the magnetic pull was just undeniable. The Silicon Docks were born, acting as a European reflection of California's Silicon Valley. Drawn by that amazing talent pool we talked about, and, of course, those famous tax incentives, this wasn't just a tech boom. It generated massive economic ripple effects across retail, hospitality, and real estate, fundamentally transforming Dublin into a buzzing, cosmopolitan ecosystem.
Act 4. The Shadows. Now, every thriller has its shadows, right? And behind this incredible, highly visible boom was a highly controversial tax architecture designed by financial architects over in the IFSC. Let's walk through the mechanics of the infamous double Irish loophole used by giants like Google and Apple. Essentially, they use two branches of a company. You have IRL-1, an Irish registered company that actually conducts sales and interacts with global customers outside the Americas. Then you have IRL-2, a Bermuda-managed company that holds the highly valuable intellectual property and pays zero Irish tax. By separating the sales from the IP, they effectively shielded massive global profits from both U.S. and Irish taxes.
When the EU finally forced the closure of the double Irish, companies just shifted to a new tool, often called the green jersey. This corporate restructuring of tax tools is exactly what caused Ireland's GDP to artificially jump by over 34% overnight in 2015. It was a distortion so completely absurd that economist Paul Krugman mockingly coined the term leprechaun economics.
To put this into perspective, just look at Apple's financials. Between 2004 and 2014, they shielded an unbelievable 110.8 billion euros in untaxed profits. This ultimately led the European Commission to slap Apple with a historic 13 billion euro fine for illegal state aid. Now, we're just reporting on this impartially as it played out in the courts, but it really shows the absolute mind-boggling scale of the money flowing through this Irish system.
Act 5, the next move. With these loopholes closing and the whole world watching, the obvious question is, what exactly does the Irish economic machine do next?
While the IDA is definitely not resting on its laurels, their latest playbook, the Adapt Intelligently 2025 to 2029 strategy, is all about the pivot. They're expanding semiconductor dominance, growing health and life sciences, and pivoting hard into digitalization and AI. But there's a catch. Those incredibly power-hungry data centers needed for AI are putting a massive strain on the national power grid, which means Ireland is now having to invest heavily in green sustainability and decarbonization just to keep the lights on while they grow.
And here is the wildest part. We are now in the 15% global minimum tax era. Even as the OECD enforces this minimum tax to curb these exact financial maneuvers, Ireland's corporate tax revenues miraculously just continue to break records. It seems like every attempt at global tax reform just hands them another massive windfall.
Which leaves us with a massive cliffhanger. In an era of deglobalization and closing loopholes, what will be Ireland's next grand pivot to maintain its crown as the Silicon Isle? How will this small island outmaneuver the global economy next, and what lessons can the rest of us learn from their playbook? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and we'll see you next time.